My name is Linda, and my story isn't just a tale of love. It's a saga that unfolds across many chapters of my life. However, the journey of my life with Joe started on a radiant note, much like the warm hues of a setting sun. We met during our early 20s at a friend's party. It was one of those casual get-togethers, filled with laughter and light chatter of young adults discussing everything and nothing at the same time. I was sipping on a soda, carefully balancing my plate of snacks in one hand, when our eyes met across the room. He had the kind of smile that could make you forget everything around you. I know it sounds cliché, but it felt as though time stood still. "Hey, you look like someone who appreciates a good sense of humor," he said, breaking the ice as he approached me. "Is that your best pickup line?" I replied, amused. "It's not a line if it's true," he shot back, grinning. From that moment, our connection was undeniable. The room disappeared. It was just Joe and me, engrossed in a conversation that seemed to stretch on for hours, but ended too soon. We exchanged numbers and soon after began dating. Joe was a chemical engineer and I was a budding journalist. Despite our different careers, we found common ground in our shared values, love for adventure, and the belief that laughter was essential to life. Our dates weren't just dinners or movies. They were treasure hunts, trips to obscure art galleries, and even volunteering at local charities. Each date felt like a new episode in a series we were writing together, and I couldn't wait for the next chapter. Fast forward to 2 years later and we were standing at the altar. It was an idyllic scene. Our family and friends surrounded us. Soft sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the small chapel, and we both had radiant smiles of people who had just found their forever. "Are you ready for this?" Joe whispered to me as the wedding march began. More than I've ever been for anything in my life, I whispered back, tears of joy in my eyes. We said our vows, exchanged rings, and sealed our promise with a kiss. The air was thick with applause, joyous shouts, and more than a few happy tears. "Our life is going to be incredible, Linda," Joe told me later that night after the celebration had ended and we were finally alone. "I can't wait to see what adventures await us," I said, sharing his enthusiastic outlook on our future. And that was the first chapter of our life together, a blend of love, anticipation, and copious amounts of laughter. But like any book, each chapter carries its own tone, its own lessons. I had no way of knowing then that our story would take a darker turn, that the laughter would become a distant echo, replaced by something much colder and unfathomable. But for now, let me linger a bit longer in this chapter, in the warmth of what was. For this was the time when I believed in forever, in the man standing beside me, and in the life we were building together. It was a time of love and laughter, and it was wonderful. After our idyllic wedding and an unforgettable honeymoon exploring the romantic corners of Italy, Joe and I returned home. We were eager to build on the love that had been the foundation of our relationship. Now, as newlyweds, we spent our days making plans for the future, and our nights whispering sweet nothings to each other. It wasn't long before I discovered that I was pregnant. When I first saw that tiny pink line on the pregnancy test, my emotions were a whirlpool of elation, shock, and a bit of fear. However, mostly I was thrilled about this new chapter, and I couldn't wait to share the news with Joe. I decided to surprise him. I set the table for dinner with candles, flowers, and cooked his favorite meal. As we sat down, the atmosphere was filled with a sense of intimacy, a bubble that included just the two of us. "How was your day?" I asked him, trying to contain my excitement. "It was okay," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "Work has been stressful lately, but coming home to you makes it all worthwhile." I smiled at his comment, my heart pounding with anticipation. "Well, I have some news that might just make your day a whole lot better." Joe perked up, intrigued. "Oh, what is it?" I asked, handing him a tiny baby onesie that read "New player joining the game." I watched his eyes widen in surprise and his mouth fall open. "Are you serious, Linda? Are you saying we're going to be parents?" His voice trembled with excitement and disbelief. "Yes," I beamed, tears forming in my eyes. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment, he just stared at me, then at the onesie, as if his brain was processing this monumental news. Then his face broke into an enormous grin and he pulled me into a hug, lifting me off my feet in his joy. "This is incredible, absolutely incredible. We're gonna be a family." he exclaimed. The joy of that moment, the promise of a new life together, and the miracle that was unfolding within me. Everything felt perfect. It was as if the universe had conspired to give us this gift as a testament to our love. We celebrated by making plans for the future. That night, we stayed up late, jotting down names we liked, debating whether we should paint the baby room blue or pink, and even exploring bigger issues like schools and how we'd balance work and family life. Should we move to a bigger house? Maybe something in the suburbs? Joe proposed. Yes, definitely, I agreed. Somewhere David can run around and play, with trees and maybe even a pond. Oh, so we're naming him David now, are we? Joe laughed. It's a nice name, I defended my choice, chuckling along. We'll see, Joe inked. We have time to decide. This was our miracle, a gift wrapped in tiny kicks and ultrasound images. We already loved this unborn child so much, our hearts aching with a happiness that words could hardly describe. And in that time, we felt invincible, as if life had granted us this unique happiness that no one could steal. Yet, in the deeper recesses of my mind, a tiny voice whispered that life was never just a series of happy chapters. There would be twists and turns, some that could be devastating. But for now, that voice was drowned out by the overwhelming joy of our miracle, of the new life that would join us. We were so wrapped up in our happiness that we were blind to any signs that something darker lurked in the pages, yet to be read. For now, all we saw was the light. When you're pregnant, the passage of time is marked by more than just the ticking of a clock or the turning of calendar pages. Each moment is filled with anticipation, each heartbeat a tiny drum roll leading up to the grand entrance. After months filled with prenatal checkups, reading baby books, assembling cribs, and endless rounds of guessing games with friends and family about the baby's gender, the day finally came. Our son David was born after 7 challenging yet incredibly rewarding months. The labor was long and exhausting, but the moment David arrived, every ounce of pain and fatigue evaporated. I couldn't take my eyes off our little miracle. He's beautiful, I whispered, overcome with emotion. He sure is. And look, he's got your eyes, Joe said, his voice tinged with awe as he gently touched the baby's cheek. And your chin, I replied, already seeing glimpses of both of us in our son's features. We couldn't stop staring at David, still in disbelief that we had created something so pure and beautiful. After the first few nights in the hospital, we finally brought him home, into the small apartment that suddenly felt like it was bursting at the seams with love. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, constant diaper changes, and the ubiquitous aroma of baby lotion and formula. Yet each little gurgle and every tiny smile from David made all the challenges worthwhile. You know, we need to start planning his baptism, Joe suggested one evening as we sat on our worn-out couch, both exhausted but elated. Yeah, we should, I agreed. And we also need to think about schools. Before you know it, he'll be out of diapers and into textbooks. Joe chuckled. You're already planning his education. He's just a couple of weeks old. I know, I smiled, but these days will fly by and we need to be prepared. It was amidst this euphoria and fatigue that we started adjusting to our new roles as parents. Yet despite our preoccupations and the demands of caring for a newborn, we never forgot to steal some moments for ourselves. Quiet exchanges of love reaffirming our bond. I love you. You know that, right? I said to Joe during one of those quiet moments as David napped in his crib. I love you too, Linda, he replied, kissing me softly. Yes, we had David and life felt richer, more nuanced. Our joy had multiplied, not just adding a new chapter to our life story, but almost like beginning an entirely new book. Yet, as we reveled in our newfound happiness, I couldn't help but feel that each chapter in life comes with its own set of trials. Though I pushed this thought away, wanting only to bask in our joy, the seed of this idea had been planted. Unbeknownst to us, another chapter was waiting just around the corner. A chapter that would turn the page on everything we thought we knew. But for now, let's pause here in this narrative. Let's linger a while in the happiness of David's arrival, the miracle that he was to us, and the promise he held for a future that seemed so bright. We needed sunglasses just to glimpse at it. 4 years passed like a whirlwind, filled with milestones that we'd impatiently awaited, and then savored with the delight of proud parents. David's first steps, his first words, and even his first day at preschool were momentous occasions for us. Our baby boy had transformed into an exuberant little human with his own likes, dislikes, and an uncanny knack for sensing moods, especially mine. Throughout these years, I had worked relentlessly in my career, often staying late to meet deadlines, all while juggling my responsibilities as a mom. Joe's career had also flourished, and we were both proud of each other's accomplishments. Are we getting too caught up in our jobs? Are we forgetting to live? I once asked Joe during a particularly stressful week. No, he assured me. We're building a life, Linda, not just for us, but for David, too. Every bit of hard work will pay off. It was with this optimism that I'd spent years saving, making wise investments, and doing freelance work on the side. And finally, all our scrimping and saving bore fruit. I managed to gather enough to buy the house we'd always dreamed of. A beautiful 2-story structure with a lush garden and even a small pond in the backyard. All for $2 million. I can't believe this is happening, Joe said in awe as we stood in our new living room, still empty but full of promise. We made it happen, I corrected him together. Well, mostly you with your killer job, he joked. Don't underestimate the power of a working mom. I teased back. I can earn, save, and change diapers, all without breaking a sweat. We laughed, both ecstatic to begin this new chapter in our dream house. Even David seemed thrilled, running around the garden, giggling as he discovered new hiding spots. Mommy, this place is awesome, David exclaimed, his eyes shining with childlike wonder. It's our new home, honey, and you're going to have the best time growing up here, I assured him, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment and contentment. To celebrate, Joe suggested we open a bottle of wine. A new house calls for a new bottle, he declared, pulling out a vintage red from one of the moving boxes. However, as he began to uncork the bottle, David suddenly looked up, his small face scrunched in worry. Mom, that looks dangerous, he said. Life is full of dangers, buddy, but don't worry. Daddy knows what he's doing, I reassured him, even though his words sent a chill down my spine. At that moment, I thought nothing of David's innocent comment, but the feeling it gave me, a vague sense of unease, was inexplicable. I brushed it aside as nothing more than a symptom of the general exhaustion and stress that had marked our move. We poured the wine and raised our glasses. To new beginnings, Joe toasted. To our forever home, I added. We clinked glasses, blissfully unaware that this wasn't just a new chapter in our lives, but a harbinger of a tale so twisted, so unimaginable, that it would shake the very foundation of everything we'd built. But for that moment, as the sun set on our first day in the dream house we had worked so hard for, we were a united family, standing on the threshold of what we believed was a new era of happiness. How little we knew of what was to come, or of how our lives would be irrevocably changed in a way we couldn't possibly foresee. After the wine glasses were filled and the cork had been neatly placed back on the table, Joe remembered that we needed something more to complete the celebration. Ah, cheese. You can't have good wine without cheese, he remarked, heading towards the kitchen. As he turned his back, I glanced at David, who was sitting on the couch, engrossed in a coloring book. He looked up for a moment and met my eyes. Be careful, Mommy, he said softly, his innocent face showing a flicker of concern that seemed oddly out of place for a 4-year-old. His words, mixed with the eerie feeling I had earlier, prompted me to switch the wine glasses when Joe wasn't looking. A strange suspicion gnawed at me, its claws digging deeper into my mind. Mommy's always careful, I assured David, though my voice wavered. Joe returned with an assorted plate of cheese and some crackers. Voila, complimenting our wine with some fine cheese. Could this get any better? As he picked up his glass, he looked at me with an expression that I couldn't read. Was it love? Was it something else? The questions were swirling in my head as we both took our first sips. I watched him closely. The room seemed to grow tense, the air thickening around us as if pressing down. After a few sips, something terrifying happened. Joe's face contorted in anguish. His hand clutched his chest and he dropped his wine glass. The red liquid splattered across the floor like an omen. Foam formed at the corners of his mouth, and he staggered before collapsing onto the ground. Joe, I screamed, rushing to his side. David, call 911. I shouted, fumbling to unlock my phone and thrusting it into my son's hands. David, frightened but strangely composed, dialed the emergency number and quickly handed the phone back to me. My hands shook as I spoke to the operator, but it was too late. By the time the ambulance arrived, Joe was gone. The paramedics declared him dead at the scene, their faces a mix of professional detachment and subtle curiosity. The police arrived shortly after. They took samples of the wine, questioned me extensively, and even eyed David as if he could provide some insight into this horrifying twist of fate. "We'll need to take you in for questioning," one of the officers said. "There are circumstances here that need to be clarified," but I protested I didn't do anything. My eyes were wet with tears, not just for Joe, but for the accusation that hung in the air, threatening to shatter what was left of our family. "We'll see," said the officer, a middle-aged woman with stern eyes that seemed to penetrate my soul. "For now, we need to treat this as a potential crime scene." As I looked around our new home, the dream house that was supposed to mark the beginning of a blissful chapter, I felt like it had turned into a nightmarish trap. The walls seemed to close in on me, and for the first time, I felt utterly alone, weighed down by a dread I couldn't shake off. David, still holding his coloring book, came up to me. "It's gonna be okay, Mommy," he said, his voice steady but tinged with a sadness no child should have to bear. I hugged him tightly, drawing some comfort from his resilience. The suspicion, the terrifying turn of events, and the inexplicable death of Joe had thrust us into a dark chapter. But David's words, as eerie as they had seemed, were my only lifeline. It was as if he had known something, sensed something that I had not. As I was led away by the police, my thoughts oscillated between fear, sorrow, and a growing realization that our lives would never be the same again. David's words echoed in my mind. "Be careful, Mommy." And I understood that they were more than just a child's innocent concern. They were a warning, one that had perhaps saved my life and one that marked the end of my naivety. The police station was cold, the kind of cold that seems to seep into your bones and freeze your soul. I sat in the interrogation room, an array of harsh lights beating down on me, as if trying to extract some dark secret. My lawyer sat beside me, scribbling notes, his face a mask of professional calm. Detective Williams walked in, a burly man with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He sat down across from me, arranging his papers with the precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times. "So, Mrs. Linda, you expect us to believe that you had no hand in your husband's sudden, unexplained death?" He began, his eyes searching my face for any hint of deceit. "I've told you, I had no reason to harm Joe." "We were happy," I retorted, my voice tinged with desperation. "We just moved into our dream house, for heaven's sake." Detective Williams leaned forward. "People have been killed for less, you know. Money is a powerful motive, especially a house worth $2 million. My lawyer interjected, "Detective, there's no need to jump to conclusions. Let's focus on the facts and evidence. There is no concrete evidence linking my client to any wrongdoing. Speculation does not constitute guilt." The detective sighed and changed tactics. "Tell me about your son, David. He seems to be an unusual child." I looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean, unusual?" "He is a normal 4-year-old. He warned you about the wine being dangerous?" The detective pressed. "Is not that odd behavior for a child his age?" I hesitated. David is perceptive, but he is just a kid. He could not have possibly known what would happen. If anything, his warning saved me. After what seemed like an eternity, my lawyer managed to secure my release due to lack of evidence, but the cloud of suspicion hung heavy, and I knew that I would have to fight tooth and nail to clear my name. As I stepped out of the station, I saw David sitting with my sister, Emily. He ran up to me and hugged me tightly, his small body trembling. "Mommy, you're back." "I'm back, sweetheart, and I am not going anywhere," I whispered, hugging him back just as tightly. When we returned to the house, it felt like stepping into a tomb. The celebration that started as a joyous occasion had turned into a tragedy that shattered our lives. And as much as I wanted to flee, to take David and escape from this nightmare, I knew that was not an option. That night, after putting David to bed, I started going through Joe's personal items, searching for any clues that could shed light on his shocking act. Finally, in a hidden compartment in his desk, I found it. A a small vial of poison and a stack of love letters from another woman. My heart sank as I leafed through them, each word stabbing me like a knife. Suddenly, David's voice broke my reverie. "Mommy, are you okay?" I looked up, my eyes filled with tears. "No, David, I am not. But I will be. We both will be." And that was the bitter lesson of my life. I had loved deeply, trusted completely, only to find that the man I had built a life with was capable of the ultimate betrayal. I looked at David, his eyes filled with an understanding far beyond his years, and realized that despite the lies, the deception, and the horrific turn of events, we had each other. We were the survivors, the ones who would carry on. As we moved forward, I knew that we would never forget nightmare that had unfolded, but perhaps we could find some semblance of peace, some new definition of happiness. And though I had nearly died due to the malicious actions of a man I thought I knew, the lesson was received loud and clear. I vowed never to let my guard down, never to blindly trust, and above all, to protect David at all costs.